If you're writing a romantasy novel, here's what most new writers are getting wrong. Say what you want about the genre, the spice, the tropes, or whatever other gripe you might have, but romantasy has exploded a hole in what was absolutely a dying art. Now you might disagree with me on that, but you can't deny that this blend of romance and fantasy has renewed people's interest in reading in a big way, and I am so here for it. As this genre rises in popularity, more writers are rushing to create their own romantasy worlds without truly understanding what it is that makes these stories great. If you're new here, my name is Brianna, and I post writing videos every week on character development, world building, and other writing related things. I also sell cheap digital and printer friendly writing workbooks on my Etsy shop, so if you're interested, hit subscribe. And feel free to follow me on Threads where I post more writing tips and book prompts separate from my YouTube content. All the links are in the description below. So what exactly is romantasy, and how is it different from, say, fantasy romance? They may sound similar, but they actually have opposite focuses and different reader expectations. Romantasy puts the fantasy plot first, with romance as a crucial but secondary element. Think Fourth Wing or A Court of Thorns and Roses. The main plot revolves around political intrigue, magical conflicts, or world-threatening crises, while the romance weaves throughout. Fantasy romance, on the other hand, centers the love story. The fantasy elements create a magical backdrop, but the relationship drives the plot. The primary goal here is ending with a happily ever after or a happy for now, but romantasy doesn't always need that kind of resolution. It depends on the specific narrative and the plot. This swap and difference affects everything from pacing to character development to marketing. If you get it wrong, you risk disappointing the readers who came in with different expectations. I also made a video on writing fantasy romance, so if you're interested, feel free to watch that one after this. What are readers actually looking for in a romantasy novel? They want immersion in rich, dynamic worlds with high stakes, complex social systems, but also authentic relationships that develop organically alongside these epic, larger scale conflicts. In my Etsy shop, I have an ultimate romantasy writing workbook, and I created specific sections for the world building, character development, and the romance arc integration, because these three elements must work in harmony. To write a strong romantasy novel, it should feature morally gray characters with depth and complexity. I don't mean morally gray like your typical shadow daddy grappling with his dark primal desires for the gentle but stubborn protagonist. No. I mean, all your characters, and your minor characters if you can swing it, should not be cookie-cutter archetypes. They should have contradictions that reflect the push and pull between their noble goals and desires against their flaws, bad habits, secrets, past deeds. Characters who start the story with a strong belief or mantra and then break that belief along the way. These are morally gray characters. Magic systems with clear rules and limitations. It doesn't need to be overly complicated, but the main goal is to not overpower your magic. There should be consequences to drawing too much power, or maybe it can only be wielded through an artifact, or other kinds of limitations like that. Brandon Sanderson has some great YouTube videos on this. Romance that develops naturally amid the conflict without being overshadowed. When you're blending two separate genres, romance and fantasy in this case, you need to incorporate elements of both in a way that gives them equal presence. In fantasy romance, the scales are tipped towards romance, but romantasy needs to balance the genres more levelly. Usually the fantasy element relates to the plot, and the romance is intertwined throughout the story as the characters navigate this plot. But you can strengthen this weave by having the romance challenged again and again by the plot, so that it's a much more satisfying and earned romantic resolution at the end. Political systems with genuine complexity. Where I live, oftentimes what's done is when they're clearing out trees near a road for farmland or whatever purpose, they leave a strip of leaves lining the road. So it gives the appearance that there's lush forest behind this line, when in reality it's all empty. It's all surface level depth. And oftentimes this is what happens in novels. Now, depending on your story or genre, you can get away with not fleshing out your political systems, but a big element that defines romantasy are the politics. What are the governments in this fantasy world doing, and how are they opposing or aiding your characters? What complications do they pose? What alliances? What resources? Now again, this depends on your story. Fourth Wing involves a lot of politics, therefore it needs a much more developed political system. If your main characters aren't directly interacting with the political aspects, then what you want to focus on are the elements that are affecting them directly or indirectly. These are what you want to build upon so that your reader still feels like there are deep political mechanisms at work, even if there aren't any. That merchant your protagonist must deal with. Maybe they're giving your characters a hard time because the lord of their land just raised taxes, and the merchant is expecting a baby and he's worried about feeding his family. That little detail makes the scene more believable, but you don't need to include or even figure out why the lord raised taxes if it doesn't become relevant later on in the story. Slow burn relationships that follow a believable progression. Similar to my other point, romantasy involves a lot of conflict, usually on an epic scale. Realistically, this will challenge any relationship, especially as your characters journey further along the plot and are forced to confront their weaknesses, fears, and maybe even experience deep losses or tragedies. All these things will test your romance. Whether they're enemies to lovers or start the story already as lovers but the conflict is pulling them apart, you want to drag out the tension just a little bit. Give them more obstacles to overcome. Tighten the emotional and physical need. That way when it's finally resolved, it's that much more satisfying. What are some common weak points that can sink your romantasy novel? The biggest issues I see are underdeveloped fantasy elements. If your world building is thin, readers will notice. That's why my writing workbook includes entire sections on realm mapping, magic systems, and political structures, because without these, your romantasy lacks the epic scale that readers crave. Characters who lack agency. I like to call this the Sims effect. You know, when you're playing The Sims and even though you have autonomy enabled, you still feel this godly need to dictate every action and choice they make. And if they start doing their own thing that strays from the life path you've chosen for them, you nix that real quick. No? Just me? Think about it. You've created this fully realized three-dimensional character, but you're not gonna let them make their own choices? Your protagonist needs to actively drive the plot forward based on who they are. Their desires, their fears, all of it. Not just react to plot events or to their love interests or follow what you want them to do just because that's the narrative you originally planned. It's okay if your character's choices change the direction of your story. And oftentimes, it makes your story better. And they should also have their own goals separate from the romance, which can add more depth and tension if their goals actually work against the romance. Unearned romantic progression. The unwavering insta-love trope rarely works in general, let alone in romantasy. Romantasy readers want to see the relationship develop over time through shared experiences, conflicts, and growth. Inconsistent magic systems. If your magic lacks limitations or changes rules mid-story, it undermines the stakes of your conflict. And forced conflict. When characters make decisions solely to create drama rather than acting in line with their personalities, readers disconnect. It breaks the immersion. So as you can see, a lot of these weak points are in direct or near direct contrast to my points on what makes a successful romantasy novel. The good thing is that these are the main 5 things you really need to focus on. The challenge is that you need to do them well. I mean, this is the case for any story, but especially so for romantasy or any other story that blends genres. Now, how do you balance the romance with the fantasy plot? The key is integration, not compartmentalization. That's why in my romantasy workbook, I made a specific section called Romance and Plot Integration, and it aims to help you identify key intersection points. These are moments where the fantasy plot directly impacts the relationship and vice versa. For example, a political betrayal that forces the couple to reassess their trust, a magical bond that complicates their relationship, a battle that separates them, which tests their commitment to each other, or perhaps a royal duty that conflicts with their personal desires. These intersection points create natural tension without feeling contrived and makes it so that neither the fantasy nor the romance elements feel like they're just tacked on. Now let's talk spice. Romantasy readers span the entire spectrum of spice preferences, from sweet fade to black moments to very explicitly detailed scenes. But what's important is how well these scenes serve your story, not just how much spice is included in them. That's why I created my spicy romance scene workbook, which complements the romantasy workbook. It focuses on how intimate scenes can advance character development and plot. So one of the exercises involves mapping how each intimate moment reveals character vulnerabilities, shifts the power dynamic, advances the plot, and creates consequences that ripple throughout the story. Even in high spice books, these scenes should never feel gratuitous. There's nothing wrong with that, but it should also serve a purpose beyond that. They should reveal something new about the characters, build a relationship in some way, or even move the plot forward in some ways. So how do you structure this genre in a novel? Romantasy novels typically follow a structure where the fantasy conflict is established early and creates the environment where the romance can develop. The protagonist has clear goals independent of the love interest. The romance and fantasy plots have their own arcs but intersect at crucial points. Both arcs reach a crisis point near the climax, often intertwined, and then the resolution addresses both the fantasy conflict and the romantic relationship. What makes romantasy work is the seamless integration of epic fantasy with meaningful romance, where neither element can be removed without collapsing the story entirely. I hope the points I've outlined here have helped give you insight as you work on your own story. And if you want more videos on how to become a better writer, like and subscribe, and you might want to check out these videos next. If you're looking for structured guidance that doesn't compromise your creative freedom, my Ultimate Romantasy and Spicy Scene Writing workbooks are specifically designed to help you write your romantasy story. You'll find links to them in the description below. Until the next chapter.